fit into that dress. 90 days, and you're mine." The words landed like a slap dressed up as a joke. The crowd at the Onyx didn't hesitate. They laughed, loud and rehearsed, the way people laugh when a powerful man wants them to. Natalie Crawford didn't flinch. She stood where she always stood, at the edge of the room, invisible, a tray balanced in white-knuckled hands, her uniform stained with the evening's first spill. She was used to being looked through, but tonight, someone was looking at her. The dress hung center stage, emerald silk, unforgiving cut, every inch of it designed to expose exactly who you are. It was the kind of dress that once hung in Natalie's closet, back when her body was a weapon and her feet knew every beat of a rhythm no one could take from her. That version of her was dead now. Or so she'd told herself. Now her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Across the room, James Rodriguez watched her expression and smiled like a man who had just found something useful. The elevator didn't work. It hadn't worked in 3 weeks, and the landlord had stopped returning calls sometime before that. Natalie climbed 4 flights in silence, her shoes still damp from the champagne she'd mopped off the marble floor of the Onyx, her hands trembling in a way she couldn't quite explain. Whether it was the adrenaline or the shame, she didn't bother sorting it out. She'd gotten good at not sorting things out. Her apartment was small in the way that only a person who had once lived large would notice. A single window faced a brick wall. The kitchen counter doubled as a desk, and a folding chair sat in front of a laptop with a cracked screen that she'd bought from a pawn shop on 9th. The couch had a dip in the middle where she slept every night because the bedroom door stuck and she didn't have the energy to force it. She dropped her keys into a ceramic dish by the door, the only thing she owned that was beautiful, and stood in the dark for a long moment, still wearing her uniform, still tasting the evening on her skin. She turned on one lamp. The light was jaundiced and weak, and it made everything look older than it was. On the wall above the couch, there was a single photograph in a cheap frame. A younger Natalie, 19, caught mid-leap on a stage somewhere bright and warm. Her body was a perfect arc. Her face was open, reckless, alive. That girl had danced like her bones were made of music. She could hold a releve for 40 seconds without blinking. She could move through a routine the way water moves through a riverbed. Inevitable, effortless, already where it was supposed to be. Then Marcus disappeared. The memory hit the way it always did. Not like a wave, but like a door slamming shut. Marcus was her older brother, 26. Quiet in the way that made people underestimate him, which was exactly what James Rodriguez had done. Marcus had been a low-level accountant for the Onyx, and somewhere along the way he had started noticing things in the numbers that didn't add up. He told Natalie about it once, late at night, his voice careful and low. A week later, he was gone. No note, no body, just an absence that swallowed everything around it. The crash came 2 months after that. Natalie had been driving home from rehearsal, a late session, a showcase she was preparing for, when the SUV came out of nowhere. Black, tinted, moving with the kind of purpose that had nothing to do with traffic. She didn't see it hit her. She only remembered waking up in a hospital bed, her left hip shattered, the surgeon's face carefully neutral as he explained what she would and would not be able to do again. Dancing was gone. Just like that. Erased. She didn't know for certain that James ordered it. Not then. But certainty was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore, and suspicion had teeth. The knock came at 10:47. Natalie knew it was him before she opened the door because he was always precise about timing. The only thing about Agent Daniel Miller that felt human. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, on a habit she'd stopped correcting months ago. He was tall, unremarkable in the way that made him good at his job, and he carried 2 coffees from the bodega down the street because he understood that trust was built in small, repeated gestures. He handed her one. She took it. They didn't sit. "I heard what happened tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. Natalie wrapped both hands around the cup. Word travels fast. "We have people in that room, Natalie. We've had people in that room for 11 months. He paused. "Let that settle. Rodriguez made you a public offer. On the record. In front of 200 witnesses. He made a joke. He made a door." Miller's voice was even, unhurried, the way it always was when he was about to say something that mattered. "We have been trying to get someone close to his physical ledger for the better part of a year. The man doesn't trust digital. Everything critical, the accounts, the network, the evidence that ties him to your brother, it's locked in a room we cannot access without someone he has personally invited inside." Natalie looked at him. The lamplight caught the edge of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows. "This bet," he said, "is the only door he's ever opened." The coffee was already going cold in her hands. She stared at the photograph on the wall, the girl mid-leap, suspended in a moment that no longer existed, and said nothing for a long time. Miller waited. He was good at that too. The first morning started at 4:15. No alarm. Natalie was already awake, staring at the ceiling, her body humming with a kind of low, electric dread that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the night before, a handful of almonds and half an apple portioned out on the cracked kitchen counter like evidence at a crime scene. Miller had given her a plan, a trainer, a schedule. None of it was optional. She ran first, 6 miles through streets that were still dark and mostly empty, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts that burned the back of her throat. The city didn't care about her. It moved around her the way it moved around everything, indifferently, mechanically, without pause. She ran until her legs felt like they were filled with wet sand, and then she ran a little more, because the number on the scale that morning had been a number she didn't want to look at. Ear and the dress was a number she couldn't afford to miss. The self-defense sessions happened in a basement gym on the east side, a place with no signage and a door that required a specific knock. The instructor was a woman named Kara, who had the build of someone who had spent decades breaking things and the patience of someone who had spent just as long teaching other people how. She didn't ask Natalie why. She didn't offer encouragement either. She simply corrected. A hand placement, a pivot. The angle of an elbow when someone grabbed your wrist in the dark. Natalie's body remembered how to move. That was still in there, buried under everything else. But it remembered dancing, not fighting. Kara was rewriting the muscle memory, one brutal repetition at a time. The tradecraft came in the evenings, delivered through Miller in a nondescript sedan parked 3 blocks from her apartment. He taught her to read a room the way she used to read a stage, exits, sightlines, the rhythm of the people in it. He taught her how keycard cloning worked, how to lift a phone from a jacket pocket without breaking the line of a conversation, how to memorize a sequence of numbers while laughing at someone's joke. It was a different kind of choreography. Precise, invisible, lethal in its own quiet way. The hunger was the worst part, not the kind that makes you reach for a snack, the kind that settles into your bones and stays, the kind that makes your hands shake when you hold a coffee cup, The kind that wakes you at 3 a.m. with your stomach folded in on itself, aching like an open wound. Natalie learned to sit with it, not to ignore it. She wasn't stupid enough to pretend it wasn't there, but to let it exist beside her without letting it drive. Some nights she stood in front of the refrigerator with the door open, the light spilling cold and white across her face, and just breathed. Then she closed it and went back to bed. The first package arrived on day 9. It came in a matte black box, no return address, left on the doorstep of her apartment building like a gift. Inside, nestled in tissue paper that smelled faintly of James's cologne, sandalwood and something sharper underneath, were 2 things. A small amber bottle of pills with no label and a folded uniform. Black and white, just like the one she wore at the Onyx, but smaller. Noticeably smaller. A note was tucked beneath the pills, written in a hand that was too clean, too deliberate to be casual. Thought these might help. Natalie held the bottle up to the light. The pills rattled softly, like coins in a jar. She turned the uniform over in her hands, felt the fabric, checked the tag. 2 sizes below what she currently wore. He knew her size. He had looked it up, or had someone look it up, which meant he was already watching her more closely than she had assumed. She set both items on the counter, sat down across from them, studied them the way Kara had taught her to study an opponent, without emotion, without assumption, just clean assessment. He wanted her to break. That was the design. The pills were too fast, too easy, the kind of shortcut that would ruin her body and give him proof that she had failed on her own terms. The uniform was a taunt dressed as a gift, a reminder of her place, her size, the gap between where she was and where the dress waited. Natalie looked at them for a long time. Then she picked up the note, folded it once, and slid it into a drawer with the others, because James Rodriguez had no idea what he was doing. Every package he sent, every cruel little nudge, was not breaking her down. It was building something. 31 days. Natalie knew the number the way a prisoner knows the count. Not because she was hopeful, but because the body kept its own ledger. The scale that morning had shown a number that made her grip the edge of the bathroom sink, not from weakness, but from something closer to disbelief. The hunger was still there. It would always be there now, she understood that. But underneath it, something had begun to shift. Her arms had definition again. The waistband on her uniform sat differently. When she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink, the woman staring back was not quite the woman from the photograph on the wall, not yet, but she was closer than she had been in years. The body was waking up, slow, painful, reluctant, but waking. The summons came on a Wednesday, not a phone call. James Rodriguez did not phone people. A man in a charcoal suit appeared at the service entrance of the Onyx during Natalie's shift and handed her an envelope without a word. Inside was a single card, cream-colored heavy stock. The handwriting was the same deliberate script she had seen in the notes that came with the packages. Private dining. Tonight, 9 p.m. Wear something that fits. She showed the card to Miller the next morning. He studied it for a long time, while turning it over in his fingers the way someone might handle a piece of evidence, which she supposed it was. "This is what we've been waiting for," he said. "Don't rush anything. Don't reach. Let him come to you." The private dining room was on the top floor of the Onyx, behind a door that required both a key card and a biometric scan. Natalie was escorted there by Lucas, James's right-hand man, who walked half a step behind her and said nothing. The room itself was small by the standards of the casino. Intimate, James would have called it if James used words like intimate. A round table set for two. White linen. A single candle at the center, its flame perfectly still in the climate-controlled air. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and along one side, floor to ceiling, a mirror with a gilded frame caught and multiplied the candlelight until the room seemed to glow from the inside. Everything about the space was designed to make the person sitting in it feel watched. Natalie understood that James had not chosen this room by accident. He was already seated when she entered. Pinstripe suit, top button open, a glass of something amber in his hand. His eyes moved over her slowly, not the way they had the night of the gala, when she was a joke, a prop, a piece of furniture he could use to get a laugh. Something had changed in the way he looked at her. The mockery was still there, banked low like a pilot light, but underneath it was something newer. Curiosity, maybe, or the early edge of hunger. "Sit," he said. Not unkindly. The way a man says it to a dog he is beginning to like. Natalie sat. As she folded her hands in her lap, kept her shoulders slightly forward, not quite slouched, but yielding. The posture of someone grateful to be in the room. Kara had drilled the subtleties of body language into her the same way she drilled everything else. Repetition, precision, until it became reflex. Submissive, but not broken. Grateful, but not desperate. The performance had to feel effortless, because James would smell effort the way a wolf smells fear. "You look different," he said, leaning back in his chair. His gaze drifted, almost involuntarily, to the mirror behind her. He caught his own reflection, and something in his expression softened. Just a fraction, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. He was. Natalie noted it and filed it away. The dinner was 4 courses. James talked. Natalie listened, nodded, offered small, careful reactions at the moments that called for them. She laughed once, quietly, with her hand near her mouth, when he told a story about a rival who had embarrassed himself at a charity event. It was the right laugh at the right moment, and she watched him register it, watched the corner of his mouth lift with satisfaction. He was enjoying this. The performance was working. The key card was in his jacket pocket. She saw it when he leaned forward to pour more wine, a slim, matte black card, half an inch visible above the silk lining. He set the bottle down and turned back to the mirror, adjusting something at his collar, his attention pulled toward his own reflection like a tide pulled toward the moon. Natalie's hand moved. Not fast. Fast would have been dangerous. It moved the way water moves. Continuous. Inevitable. Without a seam. 2 fingers. A brush of contact. The card slid free and into her palm in a single motion, replaced by the clone device Miller had sewn into the lining of her sleeve. The swap took less than 2 seconds. She pressed the card against the reader, felt the faint vibration of the data transferring, and slid the original back into his pocket before he turned around. James smiled at his own reflection. Then he looked back at her. "You're doing well, Natalie," he said, like a man praising a garden. She smiled back, small, grateful, exactly what he wanted to see. She went on a Tuesday, 2:17 a.m. The Onyx never fully slept. The casino floor hummed around the clock, and the security rotation ran in 4-hour shifts. But the VIP corridor above it existed in a different kind of silence. A managed silence, while the kind that cost money to maintain. The cloned key card worked on the first try. Natalie had half expected it not to, half expected some alarm, some flash of red on a screen somewhere, some sign that the system had registered the intrusion. Nothing. The door clicked open with the same quiet, indifferent sound it made for James himself, and she stepped through into a hallway that smelled like new carpet and something faintly chemical, like a room that had been cleaned too recently and too thoroughly. The VIP floor was not what she had imagined. There was no gold, no excess, no obvious display of wealth. It was sparse, white walls, low lighting, polished concrete beneath a thin layer of engineered oak. Everything here was chosen to project control, not extravagance. A different kind of power than the one James wore publicly. This was the private face of the man, the real architecture of his life. Natalie moved through it quietly, her shoes swapped for a pair of soft-soled flats she kept in the pocket of her jacket, each step deliberate and soundless. She was looking for a book. That was what Miller had told her to expect, a physical ledger, the kind of object a man like James would keep close, would trust over any server or cloud. Something analog, something only he could touch. She checked the first door on the left, a lounge, empty, a single leather chair facing a window that looked out over the city like a throne facing a kingdom. The second door, a private bar, bottles lined up with military precision, not a single glass out of place. She moved through both rooms with her hands steady and her breathing controlled, opening drawers, checking behind panels, lifting cushions with care. Nothing. She was halfway back down the corridor, reassessing, when she heard it. Footsteps. Not the soft, casual kind. The kind that carried weight and purpose, coming from the stairwell at the end of the hall. Lucas. Natalie didn't think. Thinking took time, and time was the one thing the hallway did not have. Her body moved before her mind caught up, muscle memory and Kara's drilled instincts fusing into a single, clean reaction. She turned, scanned the corridor in one sweep, and found it. A service door, barely visible, set flush into the wall between two decorative panels. She pressed it. It gave. Behind it, a narrow shaft dropped into darkness, and at the top of the shaft, a metal hatch, the access point for the laundry system that ran through the building's service core. The footsteps were closer now. She could hear Lucas breathing, the faint creak of his shoes on the concrete. Natalie pulled the hatch open. The smell hit her immediately, industrial detergent and damp heat rising from somewhere far below. The chute was maybe 18 inches wide, tight, tighter than it should have been for a body in motion, even a body that had lost 32 pounds in 35 days. She didn't hesitate. She dropped in feet first, grabbed the edge with both hands to control the descent, and pulled the hatch shut above her with a soft click that she prayed was quieter than it sounded inside her own skull. The slide down was not graceful. The metal walls pressed against her shoulders, her hips, the places where her body was still wider than it wanted to be. She braked with her palms and the soles of her flats, and the friction burning hot and fast, and landed at the bottom in a crouch on a pile of folded hotel linens that broke her fall just enough to keep her ankle from snapping. She stayed there, perfectly still, for a full 30 seconds. Listening. Nothing above her moved. It took her another 20 minutes to find her way out through the service corridors, past the industrial laundry and the storage rooms, and the door that led to the loading dock where the delivery trucks came in before dawn. By the time she stepped out into the cold air behind the casino, her hands were raw and her pulse had not yet come down. She called Miller from a payphone 2 blocks away, told him what she had found, told him what she had not found. There was a pause on the other end. Then Miller's voice, even and careful as always. "It's not a book, Natalie. On the ledger is a biometric drive, and it's in the penthouse. The penthouse, James's private floor. The one place in the Onyx that no keycard could open. Natalie stood in the dark, the phone pressed to her ear, and felt the shape of the mission change beneath her like the ground shifting. You know, watching Natalie fight in the shadows reminds me that so many women fight battles that nobody sees. We are often made to feel invisible as we get older, but your strength is real. If you believe that a woman's second act can be even more powerful than her first, please subscribe to help us amplify these stories. We are building a circle of strength here. And I want to ask you something in the comments. What is one challenge you overcame later in life that made you stronger? Please share your story below. Your wisdom might be the exact survival guide another woman needs to read today. Let's continue. 60 days felt like 60 years and 60 hours all at once. The body kept its own calendar, indifferent to the one on the wall, and by the time Natalie stepped out of the shower on the morning of the fitting, she barely recognized the architecture of herself. Not because she looked like someone else, she didn't, not yet, but because the body she inhabited had begun to feel inhabited again. There was muscle where there had been softness. There was a tightness in her core, a coiled awareness in her limbs that reminded her distantly and without sentiment of the girl who had danced. She didn't linger in front of the mirror. Lingering was a luxury she still couldn't afford. The fitting room was on the second floor of the Onyx, in a suite that had been set aside for the occasion. It was not a large room, but it was an expensive one. Cream walls, a single oval mirror framed in brushed gold, and a raised platform in the center that turned slowly if you stepped onto it. The kind of room designed to make a woman feel like she was being displayed. Natalie stood at the edge of it, her arms at her sides, and waited. The mock-up was not the real dress. It was a muslin replica, the same cut, the same structure, the same unforgiving silhouette, but without the emerald satin, without the weight and the drape, and the way the real fabric would catch light. It hung on a rack beside the mirror, bone-white and stark, and it looked less like a garment and more like an outline, a shape she was being asked to fill. She stepped into it alone. None the seamstress, a thin woman with reading glasses and careful hands, guided the fabric up over her hips without comment, smoothing, adjusting, her fingers clinical and precise. Natalie stared at a fixed point on the wall and breathed. The fabric climbed. The seamstress reached for the zipper at the back and paused, just for a beat, and Natalie felt the pause the way you feel a held breath in a quiet room. Then the zip moved, slow, deliberate. Each inch a small negotiation between the dress and the body inside it. It caught once, halfway up, and Natalie's stomach dropped. But the seamstress eased it gently, tugged the fabric into alignment, and continued. The zipper reached the top. It was tight. Not unwearably so, but close. The kind of tight that asked something of every breath, that made the body conscious of itself in a way it usually wasn't. Natalie looked down at the white muslin shaping itself around her and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not triumph, not yet. Something quieter and more complicated than that. She stepped onto the platform, turned to face the mirror. James was already in the room. She hadn't heard him enter. He stood near the door, one shoulder against the frame, a glass of something in his hand. His default posture, the one that said he owned every surface he leaned against. His expression, when her eyes found his in the mirror, was not what she expected. The smirk was gone. The lazy, performative amusement that had colored every interaction since the night of the gala. It had simply stopped, like a switch being thrown. In its place was something else. Something quieter and far more dangerous. He looked at her the way a man looks at a painting he has decided to buy. "Turn," he said. One word, not a request. Natalie turned, slowly, the way the platform was designed to move. The muslin caught the light differently from every angle, and she felt James's gaze move with it, across her shoulders, down the line of her waist, along the place where the fabric pulled tightest at her hips. He was not looking at the dress. He was looking at what the dress had revealed. His eyes were mapping her, cataloging her, the way a man catalogs something he has begun to think of as his. "Tighter than I expected," he said, and his voice had dropped half a register, gone soft in a way that made the hair on the back of Natalie's neck stand up. He pushed off the door frame and took a step closer, and then another. He stopped just behind the platform, close enough that she could smell him. Sandalwood and something sharper, the same scent that came with the packages, and watched her reflection in the mirror with an attention that felt like hands. "You might actually make it," he said. And there it was. The mockery was dead. What had replaced it was not admiration. It was ownership. The cold, quiet certainty of a man who had decided, without consulting anyone, that something belonged to him. Natalie held his gaze in the mirror and kept her face perfectly still. But underneath, in the part of her that Miller had trained and Kara had sharpened, something recalibrated. The mission had just become more complicated. James Rodriguez was no longer an obstacle to outplay. He was a threat she would have to survive. Miller didn't call. No, he showed up. That was how she knew something had changed. It was 6 a.m., earlier than he had ever come, and he didn't wait for her to finish dressing. He was already sitting on the edge of her couch when she came out of the bathroom, still toweling her hair, and his face was doing something she had never seen it do before. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the look of a man recalculating how much time he had left to solve a problem that had just gotten smaller. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't ease into it. He laid it out the way he laid out everything, in clean, sequential lines. But the lines were sharper now, stripped of the careful pacing she had come to expect from him. James Rodriguez was leaving the country, not eventually, soon. The engagement party was scheduled for the 28th. His jet was already being serviced at a private airfield outside the city. The FBI had intercepted 2 calls in the last 48 hours, encrypted but cracked overnight by a team in D.C., in which James discussed a route through 3 countries, none of them with extradition treaties. He had done this before, Miller said, moved, rebuilt, disappeared. The man had contingencies layered inside contingencies, and the engagement party was not a celebration. It was a farewell. "If he leaves with the drive," Miller said, "the case is dead. Everything you've done, the key card, the surveillance, the 63 days, none of it is enough without the ledger. He walks, and we start over. Or we don't start over at all." Natalie sat with that for a moment. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, the city was already moving, already indifferent, the way it always was. "The biometric drive," she said. "I can't just take it. No." Miller leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It's keyed to his handprint. The drive won't activate without direct contact. His palm, held for a minimum of 3 seconds. We need him to open it, or we need his print transferred onto the scanner cleanly enough for the device to register. Either way, it has to happen at the party. That's the only window where he'll be in the penthouse, in range, and distracted enough for you to get close. 3 seconds. 3 seconds." The number sat between them like a small, sharp object. Natalie turned it over in her mind, the mechanics of it, the geometry. She had lifted a key card in two. She had cloned data in the space of a breath. But this was different. This required James to be a participant, even if he didn't know he was participating. This required her to be touching him or holding something he had just touched at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way, while standing in the middle of a room full of people who would kill her if they understood what was happening. Miller watched her thinking. Then he said the thing she had already worked out on her own. The thing neither of them had said aloud until now, because saying it made it real in a way that thinking it did not. If he figures out what you are before the raid hits, Natalie, if he suspects, even partially, he won't hand you over to the police. He won't run. He'll handle it himself, quietly, the way he handled your brother. The words landed without drama. Miller delivered them the way a doctor delivers a prognosis, plainly, precisely, without softening the edges. It was, Natalie had come to understand, one of the things she trusted about him. He did not protect her from the truth. He handed it to her and let her decide what to do with it. She looked at her hands. They were lean now, the veins visible across the backs of them, the tendons defined from weeks of grip exercises, and the raw burn of the laundry chute still faintly scarred on her palms. These hands had carried trays. They had held champagne glasses for other people's celebrations. They had trembled, more than once, in the dark of her apartment while the hunger hollowed her out from the inside. They were not trembling now. "How long do I have to prepare?" she asked. 11 days. 11 days. And the number was almost funny in its smallness, the way a single sentence can contain the weight of an entire life. Natalie sat in the jaundiced light of her apartment, in the silence that followed, and felt the mission settle into her bones like a second skeleton. Not heavier, sharper. The way a blade feels after it's been honed. She looked at Miller. "Then we'd better not waste any." She dressed alone. The seamstress had laid everything out on the bed before leaving. The dress, the shoes, a small case of jewelry that Natalie would not wear. She didn't need it. The dress was enough. It had always been enough. It had been enough the night it hung on a mannequin in the center of a ballroom while a man with tattoos up his neck pointed at her and waited for the laughter. It was enough now, laid across white sheets in a quiet room on the top floor of the Onyx, waiting to be worn by the woman it had been designed to humiliate. Natalie picked it up. The satin was heavier than she expected, dense, liquid, cool against her fingertips in a way that felt almost alive. Emerald green so deep it was nearly black in the low light of the room. She held it for a moment, just held it, and felt the weight of it settle into her hands like something she had been carrying for a long time without knowing. She stepped into it the way a dancer steps into a role, not all at once, gradually, deliberately, letting the body find its place inside the shape. The fabric climbed. It moved over her hips, her waist, the place where the mock-up had pulled tight 60 days ago, and the real dress now slid into place like it had been waiting. And the seamstress had adjusted it twice in the last 11 days, small corrections, a dart here, a tuck there, and each adjustment had been a millimeter closer to this exact fit, to this exact moment. The zipper was at the back. Natalie reached behind her, one arm at an awkward angle, and drew it up. It moved without resistance. Smooth and certain and final, the sound of it barely audible, and when it reached the top, she let her arm drop and stood very still. She turned to the mirror. The woman looking back at her was not the woman from the photograph on the wall of her apartment. That girl had been 19 and reckless and untouched by grief. This woman was older, harder, shaped by things that could not be undone. But something in the way she carried herself, the line of her spine, the set of her shoulders, the quiet authority in the way she stood, was the same, not restored, remade. Natalie looked at her reflection for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. There was no time for this. There was no room in tonight for anything that wasn't the mission. She left the hotel room without checking herself again. The corridor that led to the grand ballroom was long and carpeted and soundless in the way that only expensive places manage to be soundless. Every footstep absorbed, every echo swallowed. Natalie walked it slowly, not because she was nervous, because she could hear the party at the end of it, the low, ambient hum of 200 people in a room, and she wanted to feel the moment shift. The way the air changed as she got closer, the way the sound thickened, on the way the world narrowed to a single set of double doors at the end of the hall. She stopped in front of them, drew one breath, held it. A doorman in a black suit pulled the doors open without being asked. The sound did not stop. Not immediately. It thinned first, conversations trailing off mid-sentence, glasses pausing halfway to lips, heads turning one by one like a wave moving through water, and then, by degrees, the room went quiet. Not silent. Quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight to it, that you can feel pressing against your skin. Natalie stepped through the doors. She did not scan the room. She did not look for reactions. She walked forward, one step and then another, her back straight and her chin level and the emerald dress moving around her the way water moves, without effort, without apology, as if it had always been meant to be worn exactly like this, by exactly this woman, in exactly this moment. The chandelier light caught the satin and broke it into 1,000 small fires, and the crowd parted around her without thinking, the way a crowd parts around something they can feel the gravity of before they fully understand what it is. She found James at the center of the room. He was standing near the bar, a glass in his hand, and he was not moving. His face was doing something she had not seen it do before. Not in the private dining room, not during the fitting, not in any of the careful, choreographed encounters of the last 74 days. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw. He was staring at her the way a man stares at something he thought he owned and is only now beginning to understand. Natalie walked toward him. The dress moved with her. The room watched. And James Rodriguez, for the first time since she had known him, did not say a word. James took her hand. It was not a gentle gesture. It was the kind of hand-taking that was also a claiming, his fingers closing around hers with a firmness that said mine in a language older than words. He led her toward the stage at the front of the ballroom, and the crowd moved with them, bodies shifting, glasses raised, the collective attention of 200 people folding itself around the two of them like a current. Natalie let herself be led. She kept her hand loose in his. She kept her face open and soft and slightly stunned, the way a woman looks when a man has just given her everything she wanted. The performance had one more scene. She would not stumble now. And the stage was small, a raised platform, polished black, with a single microphone on a stand and a backdrop of deep navy velvet. James released her hand and stepped up first, then turned and offered his palm again to help her up. Another gesture that looked like chivalry, and was really about the audience seeing him as the architect of this moment. Natalie took his hand and stepped onto the platform and felt the room contract around them, 200 pairs of eyes narrowing to a single focal point. James pulled the microphone close. He didn't tap it or clear his throat. He simply began to speak, the way a man speaks when silence is already his. Most of you know me as a man who doesn't make promises. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Practiced, obedient. But tonight I am making one. This woman. He turned his head toward Natalie, and his voice carried the particular warmth of a man performing tenderness for an audience, has done something I told her was impossible, and so I intend to keep my word. He let that settle. The crowd murmured. Someone near the back started to clap, and the sound spread, slow and gathering, the way applause always does when it is expected. James smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just closed a deal and knew everyone in the room understood the terms. Then he turned fully toward her. The microphone was still close. The crowd was still watching. But something shifted in the way he looked at her. The public performance giving way, just barely, to something private and hungrier underneath. He lifted one hand and touched the side of her face. His thumb moved along the line of her jaw, slow, deliberate, possessive in a way that had nothing to do with the audience and everything to do with him. He leaned in. The room held its breath. Natalie held hers. She could feel the warmth of him, the smell of sandalwood and something sharper, the same scent that had followed her for 74 days, in envelopes, in packages, in the air of rooms she had no business being in. His lips were a centimeter from hers, less. The space between them was small enough to feel like a held note, the last beat of a song before it resolves. She spoke. I fit the dress, James. Her voice was barely a whisper. Quiet enough that only he could hear it. Quiet enough that the microphone didn't catch it. Quiet enough that it existed in a space that belonged only to the two of them. But you don't fit the future. His face didn't change. Not immediately. The words took a moment to land. A fraction of a second in which he was still leaning toward her, still in the shape of the kiss, and then something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker. The first crack in the glass. Before it could spread, Natalie moved. She reached for the champagne flute on the small table beside the stage. One of dozens placed throughout the room, but this one had been set here deliberately, by her, an hour before the party began. She took James's hand, gently, the way you guide someone in a dance, and wrapped his fingers around the stem of the glass. She held them there. 1 second. 2. 3. His palm pressed against the cool surface, and inside the base of the glass, where no one would think to look, the scanner Miller had planted that afternoon read the print and transmitted it in a single, a silent pulse. Natalie let go of his hand. She stepped back 1 step, just one, enough to create space, enough to not be touching him when it happened. It happened fast. The skylight shattered inward, not all at once, but in a sequence, a cascade of breaking glass that moved across the ceiling like a line of dominoes falling. The sound was enormous. Not loud the way an explosion is loud, but violent the way a door being kicked in is violent, sudden and final, and impossible to mistake for anything else. Light poured in through the gaps, blinding white, the beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the chandelier haze like fingers reaching down from somewhere colder and harder than the room had ever been. They came down fast. Black gear, repelling lines, boots hitting the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded almost choreographed. FBI. 12 of them, maybe more, moving outward from the skylights in a pattern that closed the room the way a fist closes. The crowd fractured. Screams, the crash of overturned tables, the sound of 100 conversations ending at once and being replaced by something rawer and more animal. James didn't move. He stood on the stage with the champagne glass still in his hand, and he looked at the men descending from the ceiling, and then he looked at Natalie. His face had gone very still. The pride was gone. The lust was gone. What was left underneath was something she recognized, not from the gala, not from the dinner, not from any of the careful staged encounters of the last 74 days. It was the face of a man who was seeing, for the first time, on the shape of what had been done to him. "Agent Miller," James said. His voice was flat, empty, directed not at the agents but at Natalie, because he had already understood. Natalie said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The dress moved around her in the sudden draft from the broken skylights, and she stood very still in the wreckage of the room she had spent 74 days learning to destroy, and she did not look away from his face. Not once. They took him out through the service corridor. Not the main doors, the ones that led to the lobby, to the street, to the public. The FBI did not want a spectacle. They wanted a conviction. So they moved James Rodriguez through the back of the building, through the same hallways Natalie had walked 100 times in a black and white uniform carrying other people's champagne, and she watched him go from the edge of the stage where she still stood, perfectly still, and listened to the sound of him getting smaller. He fought it with his voice, not his body. His body was already handled, cuffed and guided by hands that had done this before and would do it again, efficient and emotionless as machinery. But his voice was loud, and it carried, and it said the things that a man says when the last wall comes down and there is nothing left but the raw, ugly architecture of what he actually believed. "I made you." That was the first thing. Shouted back over his shoulder, directed at her, at the room, at anyone still listening. "Do you understand that? I made you what you are." The words hung in the air after he was gone. They did not echo. The ballroom was too large for echoes, too full of surfaces that absorbed sound. But they stayed, the way certain things stay, present without being heard. Natalie did not flinch. She had heard worse from him. She had heard it in the notes that came with the packages, in the language he used at the fitting, in the way he said mine without ever saying the word. James Rodriguez had spent his entire life believing that the people around him were made by him. It was the belief that had made him powerful. It was the belief that had made him blind. The room emptied slowly after that. The crowd filed out through the main doors in clusters, murmuring, some of them still holding champagne glasses, none of them looking back. The FBI agents moved through the space with quiet efficiency, collecting evidence, photographing, cordoning off sections of the floor with yellow tape that looked almost casual against the white marble. Miller appeared at some point, said something to Natalie that she didn't fully register, touched her briefly on the shoulder, and then moved away to speak to someone with a badge. The chandelier light flickered once, as if the building itself was adjusting to the absence of the people who had filled it, and then steadied. And then there was no one. Natalie stood in the center of the ballroom and listened to the silence. It was not the silence of the moment before the breach. That silence had been taut, charged, a held breath with teeth. This silence was different. It was the silence of a room that had been emptied, of a space that had contained something enormous and was now just a space again. High ceilings, polished floors, a chandelier that caught light and broke it into nothing. The onyx without its people was just a building. Just walls and marble and air. She thought about Marcus. Not in words, not in the way you think about someone when you are telling a story about them, shaping the details, choosing what to include. She thought about him the way you think about someone when no one is watching and there is no performance left to give. The quiet, shapeless ache of him. The absence that had started everything. She had not done this for justice, exactly. Justice was Miller's word, the FBI's word, a word that belonged to a system she had used but did not entirely trust. She had done this because her brother had vanished, and the man responsible had looked at her and seen something small enough to joke about, and she had decided, in a single, cold, a silent moment on the night of the gala, that he would not get to be right about that. He was not right about that. Natalie reached behind her and found the zipper. She drew it down in one slow, continuous motion, the way she had drawn it up hours before, and felt the dress loosen around her, the fabric releasing her shoulders, her waist, the places where it had held her tight and close for the length of one performance. It slid down her body and pooled at her feet in a single, quiet heap of green. She stepped out of it and stood for a moment in the cool air of the ballroom, barefoot on the marble, and looked down at it. The emerald satin caught the chandelier light one last time. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. But it was not hers, and it had never been hers. And she felt no need to take it with her. Her bag was where she had left it that afternoon, tucked behind a velvet curtain near the side entrance, a plain canvas thing containing jeans, a white t-shirt, a pair of worn sneakers. She dressed quickly without ceremony, pulling the clothes on over the body that had carried her through 74 days of hunger and silence, and the slow, careful demolition of a man who had believed he was untouchable. The clothes fit the way clothes fit when they belong to you, without comment, without consequence. She didn't look in a mirror. The side door opened onto an alley, and the alley opened onto a street, and the street opened onto the night. The air was cool, genuinely cool, the kind of cool that registers on the skin as a fact, as something undeniable and present. Natalie walked out into it and did not look back at the onyx. She walked, and the city moved around her the way it always had, indifferently, continuously, without pause. And she let it. She was free. Not loudly, not triumphantly. Just quietly, completely, and for the first time in a very long time, entirely on her own terms.